training, where we also had an opportunity to go to the launch site. I got to see a launch site in Korea. I got to, oh, sorry, not sure what happened. Yeah, I got to learn about payloads, rockets, satellites, all that kind of thing. It was very intense and very technical, and I will not lie, I felt a little bit out of my depth, but I managed to do it. And then coming back, I got the opportunity to go and attend a bunch of different panels, to speak on the different panels, including one for the 50th moon landing anniversary at the Art Science Museum in Singapore, as well as a panel in the Asia Pacific Space Agency Forum in Japan in 2019. Through my work, I also got to meet with a lot of industry experts that I never thought I would have the chance to meet, including Ms. Simonetta Di Pippo, who is the current director for the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, as well as astronaut Nick Hague just about 2 weeks ago in a Zoom call. That was definitely one of the highlights of my life, if I have any, that many. But yeah, so that's kind of how I ended up in the space industry, very unconventional. And I often tell people that, so I can vouch when I say that you do not have to have a relevant field to be able to join the space industry, because the space industry really is very diverse and has an opportunity for anyone and everyone. If you think about it now, the space industry needs, we have things like space policy, space medicine. It's not just your typical engineering, science focused career fields anymore. But yeah, so a little bit about just to quickly summarize what Singapore Space and Technology does is we originally were SSTA, or association that was established in 2007, focusing on developing Southeast Asia's space and high technology industries. We are advocate and thought leader for in the industry, and we serve as a resource to the government, academia, and business community for matchmaking. So if you were a research institute looking for opportunities to work on commercial projects, you might want to meet some of the commercial companies. We can help to facilitate that because we are a neutral platform, essentially. We also spearhead a lot of initiatives that help to advance Southeast Asia's space ecosystem, from conferences to different workshops, and of course, drive talent development through education and outreach programs to encourage careers in the space and high technology engineering fields, which is what I primarily manage. So I thought this is focused to SSTL, but I thought this was a very good summary of how the different opportunities in Southeast Asia and Singapore works as well, like what are the space opportunities. So obviously we have commercial focused programs. We challenge the global communities to get engaged and come together to create innovative solutions for the pressing challenges on Earth and in space. We help to facilitate technology development. We also have an accelerator to kind of manage a lot of our startups in the region, which I'll talk a bit more about later, as well as training programs for youths and people who are not even just youths. We also have people in their mid-careers who are thinking of doing a career change. So you might not be an engineer in a space industry, but you want to learn more about how to get into the space industry. We also run programs that help to do that. But yeah. So technology, industry, technology, and innovation initiatives. These are, I think, some of the key things that help to drive the space ecosystem in Southeast Asia. It's important to note that I think you hear a lot about old space versus new space nowadays. I don't know if you might know what that typically encompasses, but so old space was back when it was primarily led by government agencies. So NASA, the ESA, all the main government space agencies, and a lot of what they were doing were like rocket launches, space exploration. It was very focused on big, large commercial satellites. It was very customized, where you would have a specific you could only design something specifically for that mission. And the cost of it was impossibly high, in the millions, right? So that made it very hard for people to just enter the industry. But new space, which is what we are now, has shifted considerably. We develop a lot of small satellites now, anything from between a shoebox to even smaller. We have nano and pico satellites now. There is a kind of a standardization, which means that parts can be mass manufactured, which helps to lower the cost in essence. So while it took millions to launch a satellite years ago, it takes probably a couple of 100,000 now. Not a low amount still, but significantly lower, and making it a lot more accessible to, which has also helped to boost a lot of the commercial activity in the region. As of course, I think we know a lot about SpaceX, and SpaceX is one of these people who have really managed to reduce the cost of space, the space industry as a whole, right? So they offer one of the lowest launch prices nowadays because of all these ability to reuse reuse parts, standardization of parts across rockets, and all these things. And obviously satellites are very big. So specifically to Singapore, our space journey started kind of in 2011 with our first Singapore-made satellite by the Nanyang Technological University. It was called PACSat. It was recently just decommissioned, like it recently got brought back down, but it was a Earth observation satellite. And then over the years, obviously, we've developed now 14 satellites since then. You will see the majority lie as they are majority CubeSats, small sats, and primarily developed by our universities or startups, with the exception of our first commercial satellite in 2015, which was called Helios-1. It was our first commercial Earth observation satellite, and they are presently developing Helios-2, which is going to be another commercial Earth observation satellite, but it will be with SAR technology. Yeah, we also have since kind of launched dedicated university programs at NUS and NTU to help to build the talent to be able to generate more of these projects in the coming years. Yeah. So our space ecosystem is, so Singapore has a very interesting space ecosystem. Since 2004, investors have put in over $135 billion into the global space sector. Singapore, even though we are a little red dot on the map that is barely visible, accounts for 7% of the global share, which is crazy if you think about it, because we don't deal with rocket launches. We don't even have a launch site or any rocket launch companies based in Singapore. But that is because a lot of the industry has since moved away from just purely rocket launch to all these kind of ancillary services or in space. We have manufacturers, you have SATCOM operators, you have ground providers. Of course, there's launch and applications as well, which is probably our biggest area for Singapore, and I would say also the region. We look a lot at, if you look at companies like Airbus, we have Planet, Esri, they are all dealing with satellite imagery and satellite data. And that's where a lot of the money is being generated for the space industry in the region, right? So it's not the standard like in the, I would say in Western, there's a lot more focus on space exploration and a lot more focus on launching like moon missions. We don't really have that in Southeast Asia. As far as I know, no one is really working on a solid moon mission at the moment in Southeast Asia. But we are very focused on the Earth applications of space technology. So our space startup industry, a lot of the driving innovation in the region also falls on our startups, which is quite crazy to think about. So I should mention that Singapore doesn't have a space agency. I think we are one of the few countries in Southeast Asia that currently doesn't have a space agency, which in some ways works for us because it allows us to kind of take different directions in terms of what we want to develop. We don't have a national space policy that we are working towards. And that has allowed a lot of innovation and a lot of different quite interesting ideas to come up in the region. So I think here is just like an overview of some of the space startups that are currently working out of Singapore, even though they may not necessarily be based here. For one, we have ChipSafer. So ChipSafer is run by a woman called Victoria. She's from Uruguay, but she's developing her satellites now in Singapore. And her company focuses on using satellite technology for cattle monitoring. So she uses satellite data and satellite tracking to monitor cattle, to know where they are, if there are any issues with the cattle, and all these information gets relayed to the farmers through an application. So it becomes very convenient for them to monitor their flock or like their livestock and help to better manage it. We also have people, obviously a lot of people dealing in satellite development. We have people dealing in blockchain for space. So we have Space Chain, we have Block Armor. They both deal with So they both deal with. We also have, I think, people doing data analysis, various different kinds of things that you don't typically think about when you think about the space industry. So it's really branching out. Some of these companies even began not as space companies or space startups, but somehow they saw an opportunity in the space industry for their tech to be able to push the frontiers of technology development, and they decided to venture into that area, which I think is very interesting to see in our industry. So some of the focus of Singapore and the Southeast Asian region in terms of satellite applications is Earth observation. So here you can see a couple of images of how Earth observation have come in quite useful. For one of the biggest things that we do here, because of all the trade that takes place in the region, is ship monitoring or marine management. So all these tiny squares that you see on the picture here are each a different kind of vessel, ship or vessel, and through the help of AI, stacking AI on top of satellite imagery, we are able to easily identify what kind of ships they are, what they are possibly carrying. I think this has also been used for helping to manage piracy as well as oil spills from ships. So I think there was a very famous image of a satellite image where you could see they were able to track which ship was the cause of a very massive oil spill that took place actually in the region, and then the relevant party were actually sent to court to actually manage the cleanup after. The image here you see below was the after effect or the after image of the 2004 tsunami. This is the coast of, I believe, Sri Lanka, if I'm not wrong. And you can see how much damage has been done from the tsunami alone through this. So this image was, I believe, taken just 2 days after the tsunami struck Sri Lanka. And yeah, you can actually see there's actually a before photo as well that they took, I think a couple of weeks before, and then this is the after, and you can see how much difference the tsunami made to the region. And the above one is a night image of Paris. And satellite imagery, obviously, there's different uses for it, but night imagery also has its own specific uses, because by tracking the amount of light density in certain areas, you can actually see where people are living, what are the areas that are very densely populated. In fact, I think they managed to use night imagery once to track the movement of a refugee camp across across these other areas, which I thought was very interesting to see, and a very interesting use of space technology in that sense. And deriving obviously from kind of Earth observation, we also have the global navigation, global satellite navigation satellite system, which is used ubiquitously as the de facto positioning enabler in many outdoor applications. So it's like your GPS and all these that requires location-based geospatial data. But it's also used in a lot of our everyday applications, such as for us, obviously, we have Grab, which is like our food delivery or transport app. You have Uber, which is probably more better known. You have Pokemon Go, which also uses GNSS to do your movement tracking. And actually, just last year, we had, so the Singapore Land Authority has developed its own GNSS product called Siren. And Siren is used to help to, it's obviously a GNSS tech, but they were trying to find ways to use this tech for other purposes and expand out from their typical just land surveying. And what they came up with was a competition to challenge people to come up with ways to maybe, some of the biggest issues were trying to track lost pets. So they were using trackers on pets together with the Siren system to look for lost pets, as well as dementia patients who sometimes maybe like leave their house and they get lost and they forget how to make their way home. So we were developing tech with SLA to help to resolve all these Earth-based issues. Yeah. The next big thing, obviously, the region is very focused on is humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. As you know, Southeast Asia is one of the most hazard-prone regions in the Asia and the Pacific, and the region itself has suffered since like 2004 to 2014. We've suffered like $91 billion worth of like financial losses just from the impacts of typhoons, storm surges, floods, droughts, earthquakes. And Philippines, which is one of the most heavily struck, most typhoon-prone areas, still gets that every single year. And I think maybe you might have recently heard about Hurricane Ida in the US as well. So satellite data comes in very important for this because you can do more accurate monitoring, which allows us to track how the storms are moving, and then it allows us to do early warning systems for communities. Especially when the poor and vulnerable are the most likely to be adversely affected when disaster strikes. Early warning systems are very important to make sure that all these communities are evacuated in time and kept safe. It also helps during the actual disaster. So when we talk about humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, there is which is pre-monitoring and early warning systems. There is the present, which is when you do active human rescue and recovery works. In this case, if you've seen disaster relief systems, so disaster relief, people will go down and they do rescues of either stranded survivors or tracking of survivors. This is where also satellite data can come in very handy because they can use satellite data to see maybe like certain roads are blocked, which are buildings that have collapsed, where are the areas that are flooded that they may not necessarily have access through, what are potential areas that you could have survivors. So if you don't know, like a lot of survivors tend to congregate when there's a disaster that strikes. They tend to congregate at schools or in high places because these are areas that are usually set aside for to hold survivors. And then sometimes not necessarily, you may be kind of stranded in that area. And then of course there is the post-recovery where you get financial institutions who would come in to use the satellite data to monitor the extent of damage that has been done to a certain area because of the disaster. And they use this data to accurately determine how much money this country would need to be able to rebuild. And they also help to figure out what are the areas that could be rebuilt stronger and what are the areas that need to be improved on. And in time, hopefully, with all this data and their constant monitoring, is that it will improve and help to make the country a little bit more resistant to disasters in the long run. Yeah. So a large part of building the industry in the area, and obviously my personal interest, is talent development. So with all these kind of industries coming up, we do actually need to build a strong talent pool to be able to work in the industry. And that's where we have all these education and outreach activities that come in. I will share a bit about what are some of the programs that we do at SSTL, but I will also share a little bit about what other companies are doing to help to do talent development as well. So I think Lillian mentioned that I run 2 primary programs at SSTL. We've expanded a little bit, but the 2 kind of flagship programs we have are like Space Academy Singapore and the International Space Challenge. So Space Academy Singapore is broken up into 2 kind of focus groups, which is the youths, which is for 14 to 18, and the junior program, which is for 9-year-olds, for 8 to 12-year-olds. This was kind of developed based on the US astronaut selection program. So we try to do a lot of team building, we do a lot of very intensive theory, but we try to do it in an environment that is fun and easy and engaging for the students to learn, so that in time, hopefully, like through this experience, they would be they will be inspired to kind of pursue STEM as a career, or go on to universities to take aerospace engineering or science, and work in the industry in the future. And we actually had an intern who came back to SSTL just a year ago, who was from one of our earlier Space Academy program runs, which was very heartening to see that we actually managed to make that difference in someone's career path. And this is the junior program, so a lot cuter, obviously. The younger kids, and they do like rockets, they do like water rocket launching, and they do science experiments, a bunch of different things to get them excited about being in space or being in the space industry. And then obviously, one of our biggest programs is the International Space Challenge, which is a competition, an annual competition that is designed to it's pitched as a challenge, but it's more of a learning journey, because through the challenge, we try to offer participants an opportunity to network with experts, which is where you can see the photo below, which is where I managed to meet Miss Simonetta Di Pipo, was because we invited her down to give a talk about space debris, which is a topic that we ran for the Space Challenge 2 years ago. And a lot of the students actually who attended her talk were very inspired, and I believe one of them even ended up with an internship at UNUSA a couple of years just last year, through this networking with Ms. Simonetta Di Pipo. But yeah, we host a lot of industry sharings. The idea is to actually get people who have no or little experience in the space industry to kind of test their creativity and their innovation, and be able to network with the right people and see what it's like to actually work in the industry, because we get down industry experts to share about their own experiences of how they got to where they are now. So this is a program that is run by one of our startups, New Space, which is the satellite foundation course. And what they do is they try to upskill professional engineers. So like I mentioned before, there are professionals or engineers who are just slightly interested in going into working in the space industry, but they don't know how. New Space runs a program that teaches them how to manufacture nanosatellites, because that is one of the biggest areas of industry. Obviously, the biggest areas industry in Singapore at the moment. So what they do is they run a 5-day workshop, which is very theory intensive, but they also allow the engineers to practice assembling a MOX nanosatellite, And then hopefully by the end of this 5 days course, on top of what they originally had in terms of engineering knowledge, they would be able to transition into the space industry. And I know a lot of different companies who are also doing this now. In Nepal, there's a company called Orion Space who trains engineers to build picosatellites or nanosatellites as well, even smaller. So here we're building a 3U CubeSat. What Orion Space is doing is a single U, so 10 cm by 10 cm by 10 cm. And they bring it down to like some of the most rural areas in Nepal, and they run workshops for villagers to teach them how to be able to upskill and work in the space industry and help to develop that area. We also have Equatorial Space Systems, which is another startup who is, I said that we don't have a lot of people who are doing launch services in Singapore, but Equatorial is probably one of the exceptions. Equatorial is building, it's a rocket company for small satellites and cube satellites. So they're building smaller rockets to help launch CubeSats and small sats into space, specifically CubeSats, I think. But they do offer, they do have a special rocket which is called Spark, which is geared towards schools and universities. It's called the Student Payload Academic Rocket Kit. It only stands at like 2.8 meters. The pictures here were them attempting their first successful launch in Malaysia. So you can see it's not a massive rocket, and it only goes up to, I believe, 4 kilometers up. Which it doesn't technically count as space yet, but it gives students the opportunity to work with launching of rockets, to actually practice launching rockets, and even trying to develop small CubeSats that they can try to launch up. The rocket obviously is reusable, so they don't actually have to buy a new rocket every time they launch one, which is amazing because then it allows schools, even in the most rural of areas, to try for a very low cost, purchase something and develop a satellite space program for their own school and students. And I think, if I'm not wrong, the whole kit costs something like $6,000, which